Welcome to Orthodoxy Live, an ongoing mission that is a collaboration between the Departments of Christian Education and of Internet Ministries for the Eastern American Diocese of the Serbian Orthodox Church, with the blessing of His Grace Bishop Irene. Our goal each week is to bring interesting speakers and guests to share a little bit about the Orthodox faith with the world. And today our guest speaker is Fr Marko Bojovic, who will be speaking on the topic All Roads Lead to Jackson, here on Orthodoxy Live.
Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill to men. We praise Thee, we bless Thee, we worship Thee, we glorify Thee, we give thanks to Thee.
So now I'd like to welcome Fr Marko live from Jackson, California. Good evening. Welcome, Father.
Good evening, Father Alex. Good evening to all your supporters and viewers.
I tell you, it's truly a joy to have you here with us, and I have to say a happy afternoon to you out on the West Coast. We here on the East Coast are past dinner. You are not quite there yet, but soon enough after your presentation, which we're very excited for. For those meeting Fr Marko for the first time, he is a graduate of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, the class of 2005. So, Father, you and I kind of passed each other right there. That means you were on your way out the year that I came in. He spent about 7 years as deacon in the very vibrant parish of Indianapolis, Indiana, before coming to St. Sava in Jackson. Now his parish and home for the last 3.5 years. In addition to his responsibilities at St. Sava Parish, Fr Marko and his wife Popadia Biljana help run the diocesan camp in Jackson. And tonight, Fr Marko will be speaking on a topic that is close to home for him, but of great interest to all Orthodox Christians in this American land. All roads lead to Jackson. But before he begins, I would like to remind all of you out there that the goal of Orthodoxy Live is not only to present topics live to all of you, but it's to offer a forum for interaction and engagement. So be sure to post your questions in the comments. I will be monitoring our live feed throughout the talk. And if your question is on topic and appropriate, we will present it to Fr Marko to answer. So, that being said, Fr Marko, I am turning it over to you.
Thank you, Father. Again, it is truly an honor to speak on such a beautiful topic as this historic church, the very first that our ancestors built in this great country and on this continent, and to speak on Saint Sebastian of Jackson, such a wonderful saint equal to the apostles. As you already said, it is not something that concerns our jurisdiction in this country, but truly for only 3.5 years that I've been here, I've seen people of all ethnic backgrounds, of different races, coming from all continents of this world in order to pay their respect to Saint Sebastian, to say prayer to him, to ask for his intercession. So it is truly a blessing to be here. And since his family came from the Bay of Kotor, which at that time belonged to Austro-Hungarian Empire, and today it is part of Montenegro. We all know that in Montenegro everyone knows history well, so let's start from the history and how it all began. So his family, Dabovic, was originally from Herzegovina, but came to the Bay of Kotor, the village of Sasovici near the city of Herceg Novi. And just to, although it was under Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time, just to give you what kind of church climate there is over there, just in the deanery of Herceg Novi, there are about 89 churches, monasteries, chapels, which is a city of about 100,000 people today. And in that whole bay, which you can drive around in about 45 minutes, there are 250 Orthodox Christian churches. So his family, his parents, and some other family members came to San Francisco in 1853. They settled there. His father was running a grocery store, and he was born as the fourth child of the seven children of his parents in 1863. His family was one of the first registered Serbian families on the West Coast, and he was one of the first Serbian-born, first American-born Serbian children on the West Coast. But interestingly, at that time, there was no one single Orthodox church in the state of California, which was just recently added as one of the American states. And so he was baptized the same year he was born on Russian worship that was anchored in the San Francisco Bay, and which had a chapel and a priest. And after that ship took off, they started meeting at a house of a wealthy Serbian who also came from the Bay of Kotor, Petar Sekulovic, and some of the first memories of Saint Sebastian are related to that house and how his mother was taking him to that house in which one of the rooms was turned into a chapel for an hour and a half. Then in 1867, Russia sold Alaska to America, and Russian bishop in Alaska, which was at that time the only Orthodox Christian bishop in America, decided to move his see from Sitka in Alaska to San Francisco, and that's how the first Orthodox church in San Francisco and California was built in late 1860s. They just celebrated 150 years a few years ago. And later that church unfortunately was destroyed in fire, and new church was dedicated to Saint Basil the Great, and then that church suffered from earthquake in the beginning of the 20th century, and then the new building was dedicated to the Holy Trinity, and that is today's OCA Cathedral in San Francisco. And when I spoke with the dean of that parish recently, he said that although priests were sent from Russia to serve that parish, that most of the parishioners were of Serbian descent, including Saint Sebastian's Dabovic family. And he finished a school attached to that parish, and also some kind of a missionary school, which could be, which is something like seminary today, where he studied Church Slavonic, Greek, Russian, And of course, he already knew English and Serbian, which equipped him well for his future missionary work all across this country. During his high school years, he served in that cathedral as a teacher, as a cantor and reader. And after graduating from high school, he was sent to the cathedral in Sitka, Alaska, with the same assignment that he already had in San Francisco Cathedral. But he already at that time showed his great talent for missionary work. And as a fruit of his efforts, later in 1893, the first Orthodox church in the city of Juneau was built by native Tlingit people and Serbian miners and was dedicated to St. Nicholas. However, he was always of frail health, and so he moved back to San Francisco and then was sent for theological studies first to St. Petersburg. However, that city has similar climate to Alaska, so he, after some time, had to move to Kiev, and he completed his studies there, and soon after the graduation, he was tonsured a monk on the feast day of Saint Sebastian the Martyr, saint who was uh, born in today's France, but spent most of his life in the city of Milano, today's Italy, and was martyred in Rome in the first centuries of Christianity. And after him, he was named Sebastian, and thus became the very first Orthodox Christian monk born on this continent. Soon after that, he was ordained a deacon and was given assignment and blessing to preach in San Francisco Cathedral as the very first preacher in English language. And in 1892, he was ordained a priest or hieromonk, thus becoming the first Orthodox Christian priest born in the USA. Namely, there were some priests that were born in Alaska, but at the time when Alaska was not yet part of the United States. And he immediately became his dynamic missionary activity, and in 1894, this church in Jackson was built. He actually came for the first time a year before, in 1893, to perform a baptism. And it was done at a house of a miner. And at that time, Jackson was epicenter of gold mining activity. There were two gold mines, Kennedy and Argonaut, near Jackson, with a 24-hour activity. And one of them was the deepest mine in entire America. And when he saw how many people of our descent lived in this city, he encouraged them to build a church. And so they did in less than a year, helped with other people of goodwill from this city. And so he came again with Bishop Nikolai Zernov, who brought as a gift a bell and a chandelier, an icon of the Mother of God, painted in St. Panteleimon Monastery on Mount Athos. And on the feast day of the entrance of the Mother of God to the Temple of Jerusalem, he and Saint Sebastian consecrated the church. And that's how its life began. Saint Sebastian was its first priest for first 10 years. And the church was dedicated to our first Archbishop, Saint Sava. And interestingly, just as our Lord chose simple and poor fishermen to be his first disciples and apostles, so he chose these simple and poor miners to be the builders of the very first church of our people on this continent. And the church celebrated its first 125 years last year in the fall season. And after Saint Sebastian, there were other four hieromonks that served this parish, as well as a number of married priests, and many miners were buried on this cemetery. And we are just finishing a book about the cemetery. And many of these people were in their 20s or 30s, because the life of the miners was very difficult at that time. And there was such a noise that only 6 months after working in the mine, they would start having hearing problems. And to spend 5 years in the mine and stay alive was a sign of a great blessing. Many of them died from lung diseases. Saint Sebastian also founded and built many other churches throughout the continent. The nearest one is in Angel's Camp, 45 minutes southeast of us, but also a church in Alaska and in the states of Montana, Washington, Arizona, Oregon, and so on. He also started parishes in Chicago and Los Angeles. He served today's OCA Cathedral in Minneapolis after Saint Alexis Thoth of Wilkes-Barre and Minneapolis. He also served for some time in Canada. He taught in the state of New York as a teacher, and he had a vast missionary activity, was a tireless preacher who provided one of the first translations of Divine Liturgy into English, wrote some of the first books about the Orthodox faith in English, made the first translation of Life of Saint Innocent of Alaska in English, and traveled 15 times over the Atlantic Ocean and 9 times across the Pacific Ocean. Was very respected by Saint Nicholas of Japan, who wanted him in his mission over there. He was supplying the whole Balkan Peninsula with Bibles, supported by the American Bible Society. He spent several months in the country of his ancestry studying more Serbian language, and then served as a chaplain of the Serbian army in the First Balkan and First World War, after selling all his property for the sake of medical needs of his people, which shows his great love for his own people, but as a true man of God, he offered and extended his hand of help to anyone who was in need. And that's why, as I said, all people today love him and respect him and come to Jackson to venerate his holy relics, which were transferred to Jackson in 2007. He spent last years of his life in the country of his ancestry, mostly in Belgrade, where Patriarch Varnava provided him an apartment, in Žiča monastery, where Saint Nikolai was bishop at the time and his great friend and supporter, and also in his ancestral Boka in Herceg-Novi. And his last months and moments of life he spent in Žiča monastery by Saint Nikolai, who was with him when he reposed in the Lord, after saying that his last and only wish was the kingdom of heaven. We could say much more about him. First and foremost, that he was canonized in 2015, and that since then 2 parishes were founded that carry his name, one in the state of Michigan in the Midwestern Diocese, and one here in the Western Diocese in Carson City, the capital of the state of Nevada, which was founded last year as the very first Orthodox church in this city. And also 2 families that were baptized after his canonization expressed their wish to receive the custom of Slava and to celebrate Saint Sebastian as their family patron saint. But much more could be said, and however, the best way to learn more about Saint Sebastian, besides reading books about him, is to come here and meet him in person, so to say. Or if you are unable to come, when you pray before his icon, at your icon corner, I'm sure that you will be able to meet him truly and learn much more about this wonderful saint that I can say in 20 or so minutes.
Father, that was wonderful. The children of our parish, our teens, actually took on Saint Sebastian as the patron saint of their group, which they formed shortly after he was canonized, mostly as recognition of his use of the English language, his missionary work here, and much of the history that you shared. And I would be curious, some people have asked me, do you know of any good resources? You mentioned a book that your community will be putting out about the cemetery connected to the Jackson Parish. But are there any good resources you know of for those that want to learn a little bit more about St. Sebastian or this wonderful historical parish in Jackson?
Yes. First of all, Abbot Damaskin of Platina Monastery wrote a beautiful life of Saint Sebastian. That's the primary resource to learn more about Saint Sebastian. Also, Milina Jovanovic wrote a book about Serbian immigrants to Jackson, which is called All the Roads Lead to Jackson, which helped us come up with a title for this presentation. Also, we are finishing a new edition of Service to Saint Sebastian, which will now contain canon for Matins and Acatist to Saint Sebastian, which is in the process of translation to English. So it will be available both in English and Serbian. And also big and rich monograph on Serbian Orthodox Christian heritage in America contains many pages on Saint Sebastian and our parish in Jackson.
Well, I have to say that is wonderful, and I hope when those, particularly that book of services is completed, that we here in Canton can contact you right away to get a copy of it, because I know that is something that with our teen group we would relish being able to serve those services. And actually, I don't think we have any more questions for you. That was just truly a wonderful, comprehensive presentation, Father. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. And I look forward to seeing you all once again here on Orthodoxy Live. Father Marko, thank you.
Yes, thank you, and may Saint Sebastian pray for all of us. A man who was above any worldly prejudice and who, as a true man of God, connects us all. One who served under Russian bishop and who was called by American ambassador in Belgrade his spiritual father, who was awarded by kings of Serbia and Montenegro, who studied in St. Petersburg and Kiev, and who was loved by Native Americans and American newcomers. Truly one who is, as a man of God, loved by all because he loved all.
Thank you again. And all of you out there, take care, good evening, and God bless.